I strongly favor setting a deadline to get to a balanced budget. I'm for a balanced budget amendment. But one of the great lessons we learned when we failed by one vote in the Senate, we had a leadership meeting one night in the Capitol. And we said, you know, we'd promised we could balance the budget within 7 years if we passed the amendment. What if we pretended we passed the amendment and just went ahead and balanced the budget? And we talked it through for several hours, and we reached the entirely voluntary decision. It was actually an act of utter irrationality. We said we're going to take on the burden of balancing the federal budget, which at that time was projected to have about a $200 billion deficit annually forever. I mean, there was zero indication in Congressional Budget Office scoring that it was ever going to be less than $200 billion. And so we set out to do it. John Kasich deserves a great deal of credit. He was our Budget Committee chairman, although there is one great story. At one point, the White House initially was fighting us. Ultimately, President Clinton came along, but his staff was very resistant. At one point, Kasich came in and said, this is really going to be much harder than we think. Do we really have to do it in 7 years? And everybody who didn't have the responsibility of the Budget Committee said, of course we do. We said 7 years. And he said, well, where does it say in stone that it's 7 years? I said, well, let's take a vote. And everybody in the leadership except Kasich voted for 7. So the following week, we handed him a large marble slab for his desktop that had balanced budget 7 years engraved in it. We said, okay, it's now engraved in stone. This is over. What's amazing, I was actually surprised in preparation for this. I asked my staff to go back and look at what actually happened. We actually ended up with a balanced budget in 2 years. Now, it wasn't nearly the size deficit you're faced with, but it was a combination of 3 different things I want to emphasize from it. And we have a handout here for all of you. I hope you'll feel free to take home with you from American Solutions. The first thing was we cut taxes to accelerate economic growth. We didn't raise them. And we were very aggressively in favor of economic growth. And I think, frankly, where the country is right now at 9.9% unemployment, with this morning's number that the first-time application for unemployment had gone up by 30,000, I think the country is going to demand that we put solving the jobs problem as our first goal. But that turned out to have a huge secondary effect because it took people off of unemployment, off of Medicaid, off of receiving government money, and it put them into jobs where they were paying taxes. So the dual effect of declining cost and rising revenue really had a huge impact. In all fairness, the Clinton years were actually very good years for economic growth. And I mean, I take a fair amount of credit for that on the Republican side. But it was a genuinely bipartisan achievement. And as the president himself noted at a recent event that he and Trent Lott and I did. The second thing we did that made a huge difference is we really controlled spending. In the 4 years I was Speaker, we kept the average annual growth of the federal government to 2.9% a year, which is the lowest rate, and that included all the entitlements, which is the lowest rate of growth since Calvin Coolidge in the early 1920s. And that was a very key part of this. I think, again, you're in a different environment. I think you actually, if you're serious about getting to a balanced budget, actually have to think about ways to dramatically reduce spending because it has grown 37% in the last 3 years, and it's probably unsustainable. The third thing, though, that's equally important is we were in the replacement business, not the reform business. If you look at the welfare reform that we passed, it was a fundamental replacement of the existing system. 65% of the people on welfare either went to work or went to school. And the result was a dramatic change for both for the state governments and the federal government. We also had a significant reform to Medicare, which was our most difficult project. I only mention those as background because I am totally for the effort to create a balanced budget amendment. I think that creating a national conversation on this topic is a very timely thing to be doing. I think the country will, in fact, talk to the members of the House and Senate pretty aggressively because the country, from everything I've seen, the country is very concerned about the scale of deficit spending and very concerned about the size of government.